When the sun drops behind the trees and the garden settles into the soft light of evening, when the tomato leaves barely move and the last bird has gone quiet. Have you ever wondered what is actually beginning out there? Have you ever seen something crawling across a leaf and instantly believed it was a problem? Are you sure the ugliest creature in the garden is always the one doing harm? Are you sure every spray is protecting your plants? Or is it possible that while trying to defend your garden, you have also been wiping out the creatures already defending it for you? That is one of the most common misunderstandings in gardening. People are used to looking at the garden through a lens of worry. The moment something moves on a leaf, the mind jumps to damage. The moment a creature looks unfamiliar, the instinct is to get rid of it before things get worse. But a garden does not function according to human anxiety. It functions through balance. Inside that balance, many small lives are doing work that would otherwise cost the gardener time, effort, and money. The truth is that a healthy garden is not a garden without insects. It is a garden that still has its natural defense system intact. Some creatures hunt aphids across the surface of leaves. Some attack pest eggs before they ever hatch. Some work close to the soil, improving structure, opening tiny pathways for air and water, and making the environment less favorable for certain destructive pests. Others look unpleasant enough to trigger an instant negative reaction, even though they may be doing more good for the garden than many products people buy in the hope of controlling everything. The problem is that pesticides do not know the difference between an enemy and an ally. That part is left to the gardener. Integrated pest management guidance has repeatedly warned that broad-spectrum treatments often reduce not only pest populations, but also the beneficial predators and parasitoids that help keep those pests under control. Once those beneficial species are removed, pest numbers can rebound quickly, and the gardener may assume the answer is to spray again. Then the cycle begins. One treatment seems to help for a short time. Soon, the problem returns. It is not always because the garden is weak. Often, it is because the garden's own defense network has been broken. At this stage, the most important thing is not to memorize a long list of insect names all at once. The most important thing is to change the way the garden is seen. Instead of reacting the instant something unfamiliar appears, the gardener needs to slow down by one beat. Look more carefully. Ask what that creature is actually doing. Is it chewing the leaf or hunting something on the leaf? Is it alone or part of a cluster? Is it truly causing the problem, or was it simply present at the moment the damage was noticed? The act of asking those questions already changes the way a garden is cared for. Evening often gives the impression that everything is winding down. Yet that is exactly when another hidden shift begins. On herb stems beneath tomato foliage, along the edges of raised beds, and inside the low shelter of grass and mulch, living systems are still moving. Creatures are hunting, searching, waiting, and quietly holding the balance of the garden in place. That is why one question should remain in the viewer's mind, longer than the beauty of the sunset itself. How many times have we believed we were saving the garden, when in reality we were working against the very creatures that help it stay alive and resilient? Once doubt begins to settle, and the gardener starts looking at the garden a little more slowly, and that is usually the moment when the first truly misunderstood creatures come into focus. They do not look charming. They do not resemble the familiar illustrations people grow up trusting. Some of them even look like miniature predators from another world. Yet that is exactly where the irony begins. The more suspicious they appear, the more likely they are to be doing valuable work in the garden. The most obvious example is the ladybug. Almost everyone recognizes the adult form: bright red shell, black spots, gentle reputation. It has become a symbol of harmless beauty, something people are happy to welcome. But the larva tells a completely different story. It is longer, darker, more angular, marked with small projections, and it moves with the urgency of a creature that always seems to be on a mission. At a glance, many gardeners assume it must be some kind of threat. In reality, that assumption often leads them to remove one of the most effective aphid hunters in the garden. Ladybug larvae feed aggressively on aphids, and in many cases, they are even more active predators than the adults. That means the most suspicious-looking creature on the leaf may actually be the one already solving the problem. The same pattern appears again with the green lacewing. The adult lacewing looks delicate and almost decorative. Pale green body, transparent wings, soft movement through the air. It seems like the kind of insect people would leave alone, simply because it appears graceful. But the larva is another story entirely. In that stage, it becomes a determined hunter, feeding on aphids and other small, soft-bodied pests. It does not carry the elegance of the adult. It looks practical-focused and far less appealing to the human eye. Because of that, it is easily ignored or mistakenly removed. What makes this creature so fascinating is the contrast inside its own life cycle. As an adult, it is drawn to flowers, nectar, and pollen. As a larva, it becomes part of the garden's hidden defense system. The more clearly a gardener understands that contrast, the more obvious it becomes that identifying helpful insects cannot depend on one familiar picture stored in memory. Then there is the hoverfly, which adds another layer of confusion. The adult has yellow and black markings, hovers over flowers, and strongly resembles a small bee or wasp. Many people keep their distance because they assume it can sting. It cannot. It has no stinger at all. Its appearance is a form of protection, a visual disguise that helps it survive by borrowing the look of something more dangerous. While the adult hoverfly is often misjudged from a distance, the larva is quietly moving through aphid colonies and feeding on them one by one. What makes this insect especially remarkable is that it contributes in both life stages. The adult helps with pollination. The larva helps reduce pest pressure. One creature, two important roles, and almost no recognition for either one. By this point, a pattern begins to emerge with real clarity. The creatures most often misunderstood are not usually hated because of the harm they cause. They are misunderstood because their appearance does not match what people have been taught to think of as helpful. Humans tend to trust what looks soft, familiar, and attractive. They tend to suspect what looks strange, fast, or slightly intimidating. But the garden does not judge by appearance. The garden depends on function. And once that truth begins to settle in, it becomes easier to look at even the least lovable creatures with a little more patience. That patience matters because some of the next allies are not simply misunderstood. They are openly disliked, even while doing some of the hardest work in the entire garden. Once the gardener begins to accept that appearance does not always reveal true function, another door opens. On the other side are creatures that carry even heavier baggage. They are not merely misunderstood because they look strange. They are disliked because of old stories, uncomfortable associations, or the simple feeling that their presence must mean something unpleasant. But the garden does not care about reputation. The garden only cares about which creatures are actually helping keep the system from tipping too far out of balance. The earwig is a perfect example. Even the name sounds unsettling, and the forceps at the end of its body make it look even more suspicious. To many people, it seems like the kind of creature that should be removed on sight. Yet the truth is quieter and more surprising. In fruit trees, earwigs can be valuable predators of aphids. The Royal Horticultural Society specifically identifies earwigs as useful in controlling fruit aphids, and even recommends creating shelter for them with small pots filled with hay or straw. That detail alone is enough to make a viewer pause. A creature many people crush without hesitation may sometimes be intentionally invited into the garden as a working ally. The contrast is important because it shows how often human emotion and ecological reality move in opposite directions. Ground beetles tell a similar story, although they usually do their work without being seen. During the day, they hide under stones, mulch logs, and cool, sheltered places. When darkness comes, they begin hunting. Slugs, cutworms, and many soil-dwelling larvae can all become targets. Because their activity happens mostly at night, they rarely receive credit for what they accomplish. The gardener only notices that damage is lower without realizing another force has been operating in silence. Ground beetles matter because they protect the garden on a level many people barely think about at all the soil surface and the layer just beneath it. A garden observed only at leaf level is a garden understood only in part. Some of the most important protection happens below the line where casual attention usually stops. Then there are ants, the creatures that make simple judgments almost impossible. Ants do not fit neatly into a category of pure help or pure harm. In some cases, they protect aphids in order to collect the sweet honeydew those aphids produce, and that clearly works against the plant. But if that single behavior becomes the entire basis for judging ants, the gardener misses a much larger truth. Ant tunnels help open the soil, improving the movement of air and water. Their nest building and material transport can influence soil structure and decomposition. Many plant species also rely on ants to move and disperse seeds. In other words, ants can be troublesome in one very specific situation, while still contributing to the wider health of the garden ecosystem. The wiser response is not to wage total war on every ant colony in sight, but to recognize when a local problem needs local management, and when the broader system should be left alone. From earwigs to ground beetles to ants, one lesson becomes harder to ignore. Some creatures are never going to be loved. They are not beautiful, not graceful, and not comforting. Yet those same creatures remind the gardener of something essential. Nature does not build balance through beauty. It builds balance through function. Once that idea takes hold, the viewer is ready to move deeper into the least visible and perhaps most astonishing layer of the garden, where nearly invisible forces are already working on pest problems long before people realize the trouble has begun. As the gardener begins to understand that a garden is not defended only by the creatures that are easy to notice, another deeper layer starts to come into view. This is the layer of nearly invisible forces. They do not impress with bright colors. They do not arrive in ways that immediately demand attention. Sometimes they are working in plain sight and still remain unnoticed. Because they are so discreet, they are rarely admired, rarely discussed, and yet they play a remarkably important role in preventing pests from swelling into something much larger. One of the most memorable examples is the braconid wasp, a tiny parasitoid whose work is carried out with astonishing precision. Gardeners who grow tomatoes sometimes notice a hornworm on the plant, with rows of small white structures attached along its back. The first instinct is usually to remove the hornworm immediately. Yet that moment is exactly when the gardener needs to pause. Those white structures are not random growths. They are cocoons produced by parasitoid wasps that developed inside the hornworm and are now nearing the final stage of their own life cycle. If the hornworm is destroyed at that point, the gardener does not only remove one pest, they also destroy an entire generation of beneficial wasps that would soon emerge and continue suppressing hornworms elsewhere in the garden. The best response in that situation is not the fastest response. It is the most informed one. Moving the hornworm to a quiet corner and allowing the process to finish often serves the garden better in the long run. If braconid wasps are already difficult to notice, tiny parasitic wasps take invisibility even further. They are so small that many people would not be sure whether they had seen an actual living insect or only a moving speck in the light. Yet these nearly invisible creatures intervene at an even earlier stage of the pest problem. Instead of waiting for larvae to hatch and begin feeding, they lay their eggs inside the eggs of pest species. That means part of the battle is won before the gardener ever sees a clear sign of damage on a leaf. This idea changes the way natural control is understood. Effectiveness does not always look like a predator visibly consuming prey in front of you. Sometimes, effectiveness means the problem never fully arrives because it was interrupted at the level of reproduction. That kind of protection is easy to miss precisely because it works so early and so quietly. The tachinid fly adds a different kind of surprise. It does not seem mysterious like a microscopic wasp. Instead, it is often ignored because it looks too ordinary. At a glance, many people see nothing more than a slightly larger, rougher fly and assume it has no real importance. Yet behind that unremarkable appearance stands a highly valuable group of parasitoids. Different tachinid species target familiar pests such as stink bugs, squash bugs, and Japanese beetles. A gardener may notice one resting on herbs or drifting around a cluster of flowers and assume it is doing nothing useful. In reality, that simple presence may be a sign that another line of pest control is already operating in the garden. Creatures that seem unimportant at first glance are sometimes holding crucial positions inside the larger system. By now, the picture of the garden has become far richer. Protection does not come only from visible hunters on the leaves. It does not come only from the creatures working through the night at soil level. There is also a quieter defensive layer acting from within at the level of eggs, larvae, and life stages most people never fully witness. Once that becomes clear, the viewer can begin to see that garden stability is not created by one forceful act. It is created by many small lives doing their work at the right moment. And from that hidden world, another group begins to come into focus, the more familiar predators that people notice more often, but still rarely appreciate for what they truly are. As the picture of the garden expands to include nearly invisible forces, the viewer begins to understand that natural balance is not as fragile as it first seems. It is held together by many different layers of protection. Some act inside pest eggs, some move across leaves, and some are predators people see fairly often, but still rarely appreciate for what they truly do. They are not completely hidden. They are already there on stems above the water and in the open air of the garden. The difficulty is that people often notice them first with caution, and only later, if ever, with understanding. The assassin bug is a clear example of that kind of creature. Even its name creates distance. Its body does not invite affection. The long, hardened beak that it uses for hunting gives it the appearance of a living tool built for precision. Yet inside the garden, it is an extremely effective predator. It targets a range of familiar pests, including caterpillars, aphids, stink bugs, and other soft-bodied insects. It is not a creature the gardener needs to pick up, relocate, or interact with directly. In fact, it is far better left alone, because its bite can be quite painful if it is handled carelessly. The value of the assassin bug does not come from being lovable or approachable. Its value comes from showing up and doing exactly the work the garden needs. Its presence reminds the viewer that not every ally has to be friendly. Some of them simply need space to keep doing their job. The dragonfly represents a different kind of protection, lighter in feeling, yet no less impressive in effect. When a dragonfly cuts through the garden air on a warm afternoon, many people notice only the elegance of the moment. But behind that beauty is a hunter built for speed and accuracy. Adult dragonflies catch small flying insects, such as mosquitoes and other weak flyers in midair. Their aquatic larvae are active predators as well. That means even a modest water feature can support another layer of defense in the garden without the gardener fully realizing it. Dragonflies help the viewer understand something important. Some creatures are both beautiful and useful, yet people often praise only the beauty and forget the work being done every day behind it. Then, there is the spider, perhaps the creature that triggers the widest range of reactions in any garden. A spider is not an insect, but any honest account of natural pest control would feel incomplete without it. Many people dislike finding a web across a path or a spider holding still near the rim of a pot. The instinct is often to brush it away, clean it up, or remove it immediately. Yet on a broader scale, spiders are among the most important predators of insects on Earth. From orb weavers that trap flying pests, to hunting spiders that move across the soil, to ambush spiders waiting among flowers, they operate across many different layers of the garden. A study published in 2017 estimated that the global spider community consumes roughly 400 to 800 million tons of prey every year, much of it insects. That number alone can change the meaning of a single small web in the corner of a garden. It is not merely clutter, it is a working structure. When the assassin bug, the dragonfly, and the spider are placed side by side, a clear truth begins to emerge. Not every beneficial creature is comfortable for humans to love. Some look severe. Some move too fast to be properly appreciated. Some trigger an instinctive step backward. But the garden does not require its protectors to be beautiful by human standards. It only requires them to be effective, persistent, and present when needed. Once that idea settles in, these familiar predators no longer seem like random visitors passing through the space. They become recognizable parts of a living system that keeps the garden from slipping out of balance. And once enough of those pieces have been seen, clearly a natural question begins to take shape. If the goal is no longer to eliminate everything that crawls, flies, or hides in the garden, then what should a gardener actually do to help this natural defense team remain in place for the long run? Once enough of these hidden connections become visible, the most important question is no longer which creature should be removed first. The better question is how a garden can keep its natural defense team in place over time. This is the point where gardening begins to shift from reaction to cooperation. Instead of treating every small movement in the garden as a warning sign, the gardener starts to understand that the garden does not always need a forceful response. Very often, what it needs most is a little more observation, a little more patience, and a little less intervention at the first sign of discomfort. One of the biggest changes begins with the way people think about broad-spectrum pesticides. When aphids appear, when young caterpillars show up, or when fresh damage becomes visible on a leaf, the instinct is to act quickly and stop everything before it spreads. Yet this is often the very choice that breaks the garden's natural defense system. Pest numbers may fall for a short while, but at the same time, the predators and parasitoids that were helping to control those pests are reduced as well. The result is a pattern many gardeners know well, without always understanding why it happens. The pests return quickly, while the beneficial species need longer to recover. Then, the same struggle repeats itself again and again. The harder people try to control the garden by clearing everything out, the easier it becomes for the balance to collapse. That is why one principle deserves to sit at the center of the whole story. Observe first and act second. When a creature appears on a leaf, the first question should not be how to kill it. The first question should be what it is doing. Is it eating the leaf or hunting something else on the leaf? Is it alone or part of a growing cluster? Is it connected to visible damage or simply present? At the moment the damage was noticed, the moment a gardener slows down enough to ask those questions, the quality of care begins to change. Action no longer comes from fear. It begins to come from understanding. Observation alone, however, is not enough. A garden also needs the right conditions if beneficial creatures are going to stay. Small flowering plants such as dill, coriander yarrow, and asters can provide nectar and pollen for helpful adults, like lacewings and hoverflies. A sensible layer of mulch can offer shelter to predators that work close to the soil. A corner of the garden that is not constantly disturbed allows tiny life cycles to continue without interruption. Even a small source of water can help attract creatures like dragonflies. The goal is not to turn the garden into an unmanaged wilderness. The goal is to keep it diverse, enough, gentle enough, and alive enough that natural allies still have a reason to remain there. Seen this way, the deepest lesson is not about memorizing a long list of species. The deeper lesson is understanding that a healthy garden is never a place made only of plants and people. It is a place where many forms of life exist together and contribute in different ways. Some are beautiful, some are unsettling, some are easy to welcome, some trigger hesitation the moment they appear. But if they are helping hold the garden together, then they deserve more than a reflex to remove them. They deserve to be seen with a little more fairness and a little more care. In the end, gardening is not only about how many vegetables are harvested, how many flowers are protected, or how many pests are prevented. Gardening is also about learning how to read a small ecosystem right in front of you. It is about understanding that life does not always arrive in forms that feel comfortable or attractive. And it is about trusting that real control does not come from forcing every outcome by hand. Real control comes from knowing what should be preserved so the garden can grow stronger on its own over time. When a viewer carries that understanding away from this video, what remains is not only knowledge about beneficial creatures. What remains is a different relationship with the garden itself, calmer, wiser, and far more humane.